Hello everyone. Thank you for your patience and welcome to the webinar titled How St. Jude Medical Manages Oracle Clinical Studies Using Accel-Copy, presented by Michelle Engler, who is the Director of Application Development for BioPharm, and Ilya Gubernik, who is a Clinical Software Engineer at St. Jude Medical. I'm Eugene Stefanoff, the Marketing Manager at BioPharm, and I will be going over some housekeeping items before I turn it over to Michelle and Ilya. During the presentation, all participants will be in listen-only mode. However, you may submit questions to the speakers at any time today by typing them in the chat feature located on the left side of your screen. Please state your questions clearly. Keep in mind other webinar participants will not see your questions or comments. Nonetheless, your questions to the speakers will be addressed as time allows towards the end of the presentation. If you still have unanswered questions after the webinar or would like to request information from BioPharm, feel free to visit the company's website for contact information. As a reminder, today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on BioPharm's website within 24 hours. We will also be emailing you a link to the recording as well as a link to the PDF version of the presentation. This concludes our housekeeping items. I would now like to turn the call over to Michelle Engler and Ilya Gubernik.
Thank you, Eugene. Welcome to our webinar on how St. Jude Medical manages Oracle Clinical Studies using Accel-Copy. I am Michelle Engler here at BioPharm Systems, and I'll be presenting this webinar along with my colleague Ilya Gubernik from St. Jude Medical. Okay, let's get started. This webinar will address and will talk about an overview of Accel-Copy, discuss Accel-Copy as a business solution, and I'll touch on the using Accel-Copy in a disconnected environment. Ilya will then talk to the business process change that was introduced with Accel-Copy at St. Jude. He will also go through some business cases of how they're using the product in their day-to-day work, and finally show a demonstration of the product in their environment. Okay, so Accel-Copy. Basically what it is an application that can be utilized to migrate database objects, study objects, global library, parts of your study or your metadata, these things, between instances of Oracle Clinical remote data capture. Typically what happens is studies are extracted from production and then imported into secondary databases. It doesn't have to be configured that way. It can be configured a variety of ways, but the typical way is to be extracting info from production and then migrating studies to your test environment or your development environment for troubleshooting or QA or for training purposes. Accel-Copy allows certain objects to be selected for copy. So you could say, I want to copy a full global library by a certain domain. I want to copy just the study design and definition, possibly just the patient data. So it allows some delineation of which types of objects are being copied between the instances. It has additional features such as a full data compare. It also handles study delete, which is useful in the case that you're archiving studies out of maybe a production environment into an archival instance. It also provides for a disconnected study copying, which I'll talk about in the next couple slides. So how can Accel-Copy be used in your business? So database management is one of the classic approaches of Accel-Copy. The way to create development test environments without Accel-Copy is to do clonings of your databases. With Accel-Copy, you can avoid having to do a full clone, a full copy of your database, and actually select certain items to be migrated. And this is helpful when you have multiple groups using a particular development environment, or you don't maybe have a DBA resource, these kinds of things. So for database management, we can use it to migrate to select glib domains and studies. We can also use it to archive. For support and training, it can be, we could take a study from production, for example, and migrate that into a training database, and then perform protocol training on the study in a non-production environment. We also create a play area for users to go in and try things out or test study amendments, things like this. You can use Accel-Copy to update your secondary environments. It can also be used for synchronizing global data, such as reference code lists, your sites and investigators if you wanted to synchronize that across database instances. And then finally, it can be used as a QA tool in terms of a database upgrade. Let's say you were upgrading your Oracle Clinical instance as part of your QA checks. You could perform an extract of certain studies prior to the upgrade, and then you hold on to those extractions in performing the upgrade, and then do a full data compare between the old extractions and then the new upgraded data to verify there was no data loss. So it can also be used in that mechanism as a QA tool. Another option is to use Accel-Copy in a disconnected environment. So the typical scenario for this is that maybe you have like a company with lots of studies in the database, and maybe another company is going to break off from that primary company, and they want to take their studies with them. But because they're sharing an instance, it becomes kind of a complicated issue. You can't take the primary company studies with you. You only want to have your particular data pieces. So with Accel-Copy, it can be utilized in a way that you don't actually have to install anything on the source and the target environment. And with the command line, you can actually just extract the studies in global library of interest and then import that into a target instance without ever having to install anything on either instance. In addition, that command line interface is available to any user of Accel-Copy, even if it's so Accel-Copy being installed with the full GUI, you still have that command line interface available. And through that command line interface, there's some additional features, such as refreshing a specific table or continuing a load that failed for some reason. So these kinds of different ways to access Accel-Copy and to perform these operations of migrating data between instances are all available through various mechanisms of actually how you want to install the application. And so now what I'll do is I'll pass it on to Ilya, who will talk about St. Jude Medical and how this has impacted their business process to have Accel-Copy.
Thank you, Michelle. So before Accel-Copy, we had to do like a big database refresh. So multiple teams were affected, and then it was very difficult to schedule it, and we had to use DBA resources to be able to do it, and there was a significant downtime and inconvenience for our teams. But after Accel-Copy, we only do specific studies that we need to refresh, and the downtime is much less, and it's much easier to schedule. And actually, the disruption of work for other teams is very minimal. And also, we can do it ourselves. We don't have to use DBAs to do it. Next slide. So one business case how we use Accel-Copy is we need to test a newly created study. So first, what we do is we create provisional study in production, and then we extract study, just that specific study in global library from production using Accel-Copy. Then we delete the global library from test instance using Accel-Copy, the whole study, and the whole library, I'm sorry. And then we import study and global library into test using extract created using Accel-Copy. And then we activate the study definitions and generate validation derivation procedures in test environments. Then finally, project teams perform the study setup testing in test. And then we fix any issues found in production and sometimes in test. And then if we need to refresh it one more time from production to test after issues have been fixed, we do that using Accel-Copy. Then we activate the study definition in production, and we release the study to both internal and external users in production. Next business case is when we need to test changes to the study and we don't want to do it in production. So what we'll do is we delete the study in test environment using Accel-Copy. We extract the study from production using Accel-Copy, and when we do this extract, there's no downtime in production. Then we import the study into test environment using Accel-Copy, and we have to generate validation and derivation procedures in test. And we make protocol study changes in test. We verify those changes in test, and then we'll make the same changes in production if they're okay in test. Another case how we use Accel-Copy is for the training database. So what we do is we extract certain study and global library from production using Accel-Copy, and then we delete the study and global library in training instance using Accel-Copy, and we import the study and global library from production to training environment using Accel-Copy. We activate the study and training. We grant access to the study and training for our trainees, and we finally conduct the training for the study for the sites and for field engineers. And we allow continued access for users to do study and training ongoing after the study has been even released. So now let me do a little demonstration. So I'm going to share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we can see it, Ilya.
Okay. So when I log into Accel-Copy, this is the main interface that I see. So the first thing I do is I'm going to create an extract of the source data. So then I'm going to select the source environment, which is going to be production. Then I'm going to select the extract type. I'm going to do full study and global library. And it asks me for extract name, so I'm just going to call it. And then it asks me for the email. And this is my email when the notifications are going to go. And then I need to select the study number or the study name that I want to extract. And this is a list of studies available. And then I'm going to hit extract. So when I do this, the job is created. So then I go to the job queue section of the interface, and then here I can search by different kinds of job. I can search by job type, job status, or by who did them. So I'm going to just do it today. I'm going to find all the jobs that were submitted today. Here, so it tells me like a little bit about what I'm doing. I'm doing extract, and I'm doing this from production environment. And then here, if I open this interface, it's going to give me it's going to give me what's going on. It's going to give me like a log of what's going on. So it's going to give me a list of tables being copied, like the study being done, the environment, and the list of tables being copied. So for example, like lab _ unit is the name of the table, and then I have 2 records being extracted from this table. And it does it for all the table in clinical. And it tells me how many. So it only does it for this specific study. It doesn't do it for everything. So for DCMs, for example, table, it copies 6 records. So while I wait for that, I'm going to show you what's going on in the background. So in the background, this is the middle tier server where application is installed in the extracted folder. The software creates extracts. So it creates a bunch of Excel files, and each file lists different table in Oracle Clinical. And this, so for example, if I open this table, and so if it opens, it's going to show me all the records that are being extracted. Yeah, so this is example of table that I opened, which is clinical studies. And this is the record that's being extracted right now. There's only one record for this study. So it looks like just like a table on local clinical. So let me see if my job finished. Looks like it finished. So whenever the job finishes, I get an email. And then in the email, it says my extract. It says the extract name, the extract study, and it gives me a list of all the tables like I showed you before that are being extracted. This is a list of tables. And then I make sure there's no errors, and then it says the end time. Okay, so let's do next step. So the next step is I need to import the target. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the source environment, which is production, and it lists all the extracts available. So right now I only have one extract available, which is this one, and then it lists the target environment. And here I only want to extract to development or test environment. We're only extract to production. So there's a setting in the application where I can restrict to where I can extract. So we restricted it so we cannot do it in production because we don't want to do that. I'm going to do it to development. And here there's a test-only mode. So if you select that, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to test it, but it's not going to extract any data. I'm going to uncheck that, and I'm going to refresh target. I'm going to uncheck that because I already refreshed the target before for this study. So I don't need to do it right now. And then it asks me for my email to where the jobs are going to go to. I just want to double check one more time from production, extract name, and then the target environment is development. And then I hit import. Then it's going to give me the same thing, saying the job has been submitted. So then I can go to the job queue to see what's going on with my job. So then I hit today. And it's going to be the latest job. It says import job. It's going to give me the job number. It's going to give me some information, for example, source environment and then target environment. So source is production and target is development. It's going to give me a test only and then refresh target, no. One thing I forgot to mention, once this is done, it's going to give me like a table count. For example, when I did extract, I extracted 258 tables, and then I extracted 19,538 rows. I thought it kind of neat. So right now, what's doing is it's giving me this log information. So I go from source database to target database. And then the first thing it does is disable the triggers on the source database because we don't want to like insert into journal tables. So that's why the triggers are being disabled. Also, it's a good practice not to have users in Oracle Clinical or RDC in your target database because if they are in the system, this process might affect them. So we usually just don't allow people in the system by turning off middle tier services from the middle tier. I'm just going to refresh. So what it does, it just copies each individual tables and it tells me if it's been successful or if it failed and if there's a conflict or not. So for example, like this table, OCL study side rows table, there was 96 records copied, and there was no conflict. The time it takes for this to finish depending on if the study is active or not and how much data is in the study. So if the study has like a lot of data, it might take a little bit longer to do. But if there's no data, it's going to take less time. So here on the back end, this is a middle tier server where the Accel-Copy is installed. It gives me a little bit of, if I go to Accel-Copy folder, if I go to imported folder, and then if I go to OCDEF, this is where the import is happening. So this is the import is going on right now. So I'm going to do the latest one, which is today. So it's going to give me a list of tables again, and for each table, so let's maybe open this table real quick. This is clinical studies table. So it's going to give me a list of records which are being imported, and it's also going to give me the status, if it's been successful or not. So in this case, there's only one record being imported, which is this record, and the status is inserted, as you can see here. So it's fine, there's no issues. So that's kind of useful for me to see that when there's any errors, so I can look exactly in the records and I can see what's going on. So that's for troubleshooting. And as you can see, for example, if there's a big table, like for example, DCM table or this table as a DCMS, FFL, XML history table, what the program does, it breaks it off into different files. So that, because Excel has limitations, I think it's only 30,000 records, I believe. So Accel-Copy breaks them off into different files, or if there is a blob or club inside the table, it puts them in separate files like this. So as I can see, this is one case for DCMS, one case. And it does it for all this, like specific tables there. So if I refresh this to see what's going on. Yeah, it moved a little bit further, so it's still going on. So maybe I guess we can answer questions now while waiting for this to finish.
Thank you, Ilya. So if there's any questions, feel free to type them into the chat window, and then we'll either Ilya or myself will answer. There's one question here saying, when copying a study to another environment, can the study data be copied as well? And yes, absolutely. What the tool does is you can select these different migration definitions. So when you saw Ilya extracting the source data, could you go back to that screen, Ilya, the one that just shows the extraction and the list of different options?
Okay.
Yeah, so you see there's, I guess, about 9 different options here. So if you select the full study in Global Library, that includes the data, includes the discrepancies, the DCF reports, all of those things for a given study. You can also select, just the patient data. Let's say you had the study that was refreshed prior, or maybe you had a database that was cloned. Then what can happen is you just select that patient data, you delete out just that patient data in your target environment, and then you update it with the new patient data from production, for example. So there's a variety of those different extract types that are available to you. Another question is, what kind of IT system is used by Accel-Copy? Is it Oracle? Yes, so there's different ways to install Accel-Copy. The way that you're seeing right here with the interface, this has its own schema that gets put inside the Oracle Clinical schema, or database rather. And it is Oracle based, so it's expecting and it's extracting data from Oracle, importing it into Oracle. The this browser interface is coming from an Apache service that's installed on typically like your Oracle Clinical application server. So it's really meant to kind of integrate into what you already have set up for your environment. The alternative way to install Accel-Copy is to do it where you don't install anything on the target and source environments, nothing in the database, nothing on those servers, but instead you simply put the application on any sort of machine that has internet access to the databases. And then you can run it in a disconnected mode to do the extractions and from the command line. So you have those different options available to you. I also want to show you, actually I'm going to switch the screen share for a moment if that's okay with you, Ilya, so I can show the matrix here. share just Excel. Actually, all right, we'll start with this. So what we're looking at right now is a metadata file. And each of these different definitions come from a metadata file. And the reason why this is important, and I know that not everyone on the call is technically oriented, but I guess the gist of it is you have control over what's extracted and how it's extracted and what's included in the different types. So if I wanted to know specifically what's extracted when I select the global library type, I could look at the metadata file and it lists out all of the tables. It lists out how it's comparing if the data already exists or not. And it even lists the select statement that's being used to pull out the data. So from that you have more control over what actually is coming out and how it even removes data when it does the delete. And all these things are driven by these metadata files. But then you can modify for your particular use if necessary. There was another question I saw here. Do you use the same database seed number for all the environments, prod, test, dev, and QA? That's a good question. So the way that it works is it's maintaining the IDs from your source study. So the way that you'd set up an Accel-Copy environment is that you would potentially have your production environment and then maybe clone it to your test and to your dev. And then after it's cloned, test, and dev, you would change the seed number, which is the way it generates those IDs. You would change it on your test and your dev so that going forward it would have its own seed number. And then from that case, you can copy whatever you want from production to dev or between dev and test or these things going forward, because each environment will have different seed numbers, although the data that was initially in there will have the same IDs as was expected. So that's the way that's currently managing the seed number for the environments.
And this is kind of important to do, because if you don't do it, then Accel-Copy is not going to work if you don't change the seed number.
Yeah, so there's a further question about what does seed number mean. So seed number, Oracle Clinical was set up for this thing they call disconnected replication. And disconnected replication, the idea was that you could move studies and certain objects between different environments. But it's maintaining all of the pieces of each record in the database. And each record in the database has a primary key, which is a unique identifier, usually a number. Like in the responses table, it would be responses ID. Or in DCM's table, it would be the DCM's ID. So these ID numbers are generated through an auto sequence, and that sequence increments. But it starts at a certain value, and the value that it starts at would be the seed number. So if I had a seed number of 7, I would have my sequence be updating by like 100. And so the IDs would all be 7, 107, 114, 121, et cetera, et cetera. Now if I had another database and my seed number was 11, then those IDs would be 11, 111, 122, and so on. And by doing that with the seed number and then using that larger number for incrementing those sequences, we're assured that all the IDs will be unique in the different databases. So that's what the seed number is all about. Okay, so another question is, it was mentioned that when you extract from prod into dev, you have to generate all your procedures in dev. Is this true? What if you want to test the effect of a reversioning a procedure while preserving discrepancies to see if your changes will refire a large volume of discrepancies? If you have to regenerate all your procedures, then you couldn't test this. Ilya, do you have any experience with this, the effect of having to regenerate the procedures and what that does for your discrepancies?
We don't really worry about this because it's our test database, so we just generate them from backend, logging into the Unix server and just generating them. We don't really worrying about current discrepancies. But I guess you don't have to regenerate them if you already copied the study before. So it's not the first time you're copying it using Accel-Copy. If you generate it once, then I don't think you need to regenerate it again.
Yeah, I'm not really sure if you regenerate it from the back end, if it's the same as regenerating it from the front end. Because if you regenerate it from the front end, it definitely will reset all your discrepancies and gives you that alert. But from the back end, I'm not convinced that it does that same thing. But I could be wrong. I'd have to follow up on that particular area to be sure.
Yeah, we just do it from the back end because it's more convenient, so we don't have to do one by one.
Right.
We can just do one step for everything, so that's why we do it.
Right.
And by the way, the import just finished right now while we were just talking about
permissions. Oh, great.
So it's finished. As you can see, it's been completed, and it took about 10 minutes to do because it's like a small study. And it told me how many 249 tables were copied and 19,266 rows were copied. And then if I see the log, so it's going to list me all, like I said, like all the tables and if successfully or not successfully copied. So as I can see, patient positions, for example, 1610 records were copied. And I can just go through all these tables that were copied. Not all of them were being copied because some tables don't have any entries for the study, so some of them are 0. So what we normally do is we look at this log file, make sure there is no errors, there's no failed records in either this column or in the consult column. So we just go through this and just check it. So it looks like there's no records here. There's no errors. And then it also changes the owning location. Yeah, I'm not sure why it does that, but I think it just for differentiate the location. And it's exited with complete status. So now my study is going to be in OC development environment. And I just need to set a couple flags in local clinical to be able to use the study in RDC, but after that it's ready to go.
Ilya, can you talk about that conflict okay versus conflict fail piece?
Okay. Actually, maybe if you can describe it a little bit, like what it means to be conflict.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So if you look at these different, categories for each table, it shows success and fail and conflict okay and then conflict fail. And so, whenever you're copying a study, sometimes there's global data that's utilized by multiple studies, and sometimes it's, data that's specific to a study. So you expect different results. If I'm copying a study and if it references lab units, well, lab units are used by lots of studies. So in this case, the system checks with the unique key, does the lab unit exist? Oh, it does. Well, in this case, I expect it, so it's okay. In the case that I was copying a study and there was like the clinical studies table, for example, and there was a conflict there based on the unique key, well then, it would go and say, oh, there's a conflict, and this is actually a failure. We don't expect there to be a conflict here. So this is a failed job, and you need to look at it. And then, like as Ilya showed, in each of the output files, it would flag like which specific record failed, what the error was that happened, and then you could sort of diagnose it that way. So it's trying to make that delineation on each record as it's going. So for troubleshooting purposes, for informational purposes, and then also having certain expectations built into the application of what would have a conflict when you do a copy, expectedly so, and what would not, and it would be something that would have to draw attention to itself. So that's the concept behind that. And you can see here in Ilya's screenshot, the status of inserted. Well, if it was an error or something happened, the status would be error, and then you'd have a comment with the actual error that happened. It just gives you better ability to troubleshoot.
I think there's also another tab here, the info, and I think it tells you what query was run, I believe. If you go here, it's a little bit more for troubleshooting, so if you want to know what's being run.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, where you are, it tells you the native SQL that was run, but if you even go over further, it does the actual SQL that's run. So in column T there, if you click on it, it actually integrates all the IDs that were called and how it was ordered and all these kinds of things. So if you had more than one study, there'd be a union in this, and you could then even run the statement to see specifically what was being done.
It's kind of nice. So it's very dynamic, so you can actually put this into Toad or any other editor, and you can see what's being run. It's kind of nice.
Yeah. In addition, I wanted to show one more thing here. If there's any more questions, feel free to type them in here. I think I've answered what's typed already, but let me show you the matrix, not the movie, but the actual matrix of the study definitions. Just a second here. Screen is flashing. All right. I'm sure it's very small. Okay. Can you see my screen, everyone? Ilya, can you see it?
No, I don't see it. It says Windows not shared.
I'm also not seeing it. There you go.
Now it came up and I just, okay, hold on. Guess it takes just a minute or so.
Yeah, we came up now.
It's there now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so what you see along the left here are these different migration definitions, and then along the right you see the different categories of objects in Oracle Clinical and Remote Data Capture. And so it actually flags what's being copied. So if you have any questions about it, so like the full study in glib, it's bringing in all the metadata that's related to the study, and then questions, question groups, all the DCMs and DCIs. It's not bringing things like study sets, study unions, where clauses, randomization. It's not bringing these. That's by design, but it could. Like if that's something that you wanted, then we would just enhance that particular migration definition to include those objects. So you can see, these different categories have different areas that are being brought over, and then you can select between those as is appropriate for your whatever operation you're working on completing. Okay, there's a question. Is there a single location where it points out the fails, or do you have to scroll through every line of an email? So what happens is it's a log file. So it's a log file that lists out your tables. And there's probably 200 or so of them. And then you have to look through those categories to see where the errors are. But it also takes a summation of the statuses. So if you had a failure at the end of the log file, it says there was a failure, and then you would know you needed to go through and look at the various items in the log file. And then if you wanted to drill down further, you could actually look at the actual data items that came over. So here it says exited with complete status, but it would actually be failure if there was a problem.
And you can also see it from the screen here. If there was an error, you would see status like arrows, and you would see it right away from the screen.
Mm-hmm. There's a question about why the counts are not the same for the export and the import. I think what happened is that the export doesn't actually have data in some of the tables, so it's only importing the ones that have the data pieces. Also, there's some code in there for extracting the journal tables, but it's actually not extracting anything, and this is actually so it can do a delete properly later. For the import, you don't actually import those journal tables. So there's a little bit of a disparity in those numbers, but that's what's causing it.
And it's also customizable, like Michelle explained, what we can extract here. It's customizable based on definitions. If we don't want certain table, we can exclude it very easily from extracting.
Yeah. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, that concludes what I have to show for the webinar, so I'll pass it back to you, Eugene.
Great, thank you. If you guys do have additional questions in the next minute or two, feel free to ask them in the chat box and we'll get to them. But in the meantime, this webinar is being recorded, and as I mentioned earlier, it will be posted on BioPharm's website within the next 24 hours. And we'll also be emailing you a link to the recording and a PDF version of the presentation. We have numerous webinars that are coming up in various different areas, including data management as well as safety and clinical trial management. So feel free to register for those. As always, feel free to email us with any questions, call us, and we'd like to thank you very much for attending this webinar. We hope you found it useful. Thank you so much for joining. Have a great rest of the day and evening.
Bye.